Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Charles Bukowski said that the shortest distance between 2 points is often unbearable, which is why I love talking to Alex Harrison of Night Watch Knives so much. As my first repeat guest on the podcast, Alex has some perspective to my own personal growth in knives and with the show, but what's always interesting about Alex is how well he wears his own growth and uses that to constantly push his own envelope. In behavior that's true to form for us, we can't stay still too long, and you'll get a front row seat to the meandering that manages to occupy most of our interactions, maybe proving in some ways that the path less traveled is also an exciting one. Alex, it's great to have you back on the Good Old Blades podcast.
Happy to be here again. Thank you.
Yeah. So, oh man, since the last time we talked, a lot has happened, but not only in my life, but in your life and knife life. And where to start? So I'd like a kind of a little recap since the beginning of this year. So we talked somewhere around Blade Show Texas ish time frame, a little bit before that, I think.
Yeah.
And that was a cool show and everything like that. You had gone to Blade Atlanta, and are you slated to go to Blade West this year?
I am. Yeah, that's coming up real quick, couple of weeks.
Yeah. And I can't remember. Did you go last year?
I did.
What did you think of that? Because I had to drop out because of issues at home with kiddo and everything. But I'm interested to know kind of what the Utah experience is and what the scene looks like up there. And I think other people would benefit from that perspective too.
Yeah. In my opinion, it is physically far enough removed from the other two shows that you get a completely different crowd. There weren't very many makers that I know that I recognized in comparison. There were, plenty of the staples were there, but it's, I think maybe one of my kind of followers was there. But for the most part, it was all new exposure, which we've talked about that at a show is as much a curse as it is a blessing, but it wasn't. It was different enough. Now, I never went to the one when they had it in, where was it, Portland before that? I never went to that one. But I know that a lot of people were really unhappy with it, and I know that this one felt like a Blade show. It kind of felt like the first time they did Texas in the current space. It is the smallest of the three, but it still had like constant foot traffic. It was very well attended, at least visually from what I could see. Um, it was pretty cool. It will be worth going again this year, especially now that I've adjusted my strategy a little bit.
Yeah. That's it's actually interesting. Like I think about shows regionally and kind of what to bring, what finishes to use and things like that. And
Hmm.
some people are like, no, you guys got to do you, right? But I'm like,
Yeah,
if I'm at a knife show, I do want to be able to sell knives, and
yeah,
different regional clientele require different things. Like I could definitely see up in Utah, you have all of the greatest hunting states in America in Utah, and my kind of crowd with like the hunters, skinners, and things like that. I think knives like that would naturally do well. But if you like take me to Atlanta, man, like if I'm doing hunters and skinners and stuff, I mean, nobody's doing like suburban hunting for the most part. It doesn't
that
do
we
as
know of.
well. So
Yeah.
maybe serial killers or something.
Well, that's also my problem, unfortunately.
Oh yeah. Well, um, but how was the venue? Did you like it size wise and everything like that? Did it feel cozy but big enough?
It was huge. It's called the Salt Palace, and they used like a small portion of it, much like they do in Texas with the convention center. It's Again, if memory serves, it's the smallest of the three shows. Visually, it certainly looks that way. But I think they made good use of the space, and it felt like a Blade show when it was in full swing. yeah, you're bobbing and weaving in and out of crowds, and you're like craning your head trying to find, the people that you know, and that kind of thing. So it had the same vibe. If you've been to a blade show, you will recognize the experience. It'll feel familiar to you.
Yeah, well, that's cool. I Well, obviously this year it's not going to work out. Maybe I can get on for next year.
Yeah,
But I'll be at Blade Show Texas this
good.
coming year, and that'll be fun. And I'll be representing both my knife stuff, but also the podcasts there. So that'll be
Mhm.
cool. Um, something that I think about with like the ambiance of a blade show is there's a certain murmur that you hear like all the time. It's like if you ever watch those old episodes of Antiques Roadshow, where it's
Yeah,
like they're mic'd up and everybody's talking, but you can still hear a lot of voices and cacophony. There's
yeah.
kind of like that. I don't know what it is about that energy at like big shows with
Mm.
thousands of people and whatnot, but I kind of like that. I like that, just that little bit of white noise, knowing that everybody is talking about different things, and people are coming by, and maybe once in a while you hear a voice pop out from the mix and you're like, oh, I know who that is. That's not me. I'm not boisterous or things like that, but I do know some iconic voices that have big belly laughs and stuff, and that's always. I think that energy is something about shows and show circuits that if you're just a curmudgeon sitting inside of your house and doing stuff for orders, you really miss out on.
I agree with you. Um, I think there are plenty of makers out there that don't need to go to shows, and in fact, probably could do their own thing. You could you could probably say, okay, this is my blade show stuff. It's all available on my Instagram or my Facebook page, and then sell it all without having to leave the comfort of your home and spend all the money. But that's not what it's for. And you and I have spoken to this point in the past. I think that going to a show feels like a vacation, almost like it's a knife maker's vacation, because business is that work is done, business still has to be done, but you're just there to see people hang out, have a good time, maybe score some cool handle material. It's all the fun parts.
Yeah. Well, and um, I I think that one of the things that people miss out on if you're only making stuff in your own vein is the lack of ability to see other people's work. And I'm not talking about like seeing other people's work for the sake of um kicking yourself for your quality, or or doing like a comparison like this is my competition next to me, but just being able to appreciate the quality and craftsmanship. There's some
Yeah.
amazing makers out there that I just admire. Like I always try to go, spend a little bit of time each show, going and looking around, and seeing what's out there, because sometimes I use that as inspiration. It's like this person has a great finish, or there's something like something that makes me want to be able to follow them on social media if it
Yep.
exists. And it's that entire thing. Like we're at a great time in knives where we get to be a big think tank, and that's something that I think about. Like I've stopped and
Yeah.
matured past the looking at everybody else and dogging on myself for one reason or another, and use that more as the ability to have like the experience of just admiring other people. And I think that that's what's great.
It is. No one, including yourself, wants to hear you complain about all the things that you could not accomplish. Better to spend that energy and the really invaluable opportunity, go around and check stuff out and ask people questions. Hey, how did you do this? It blew my mind. I was on the fence about buying a 14-inch grinding wheel at in Atlanta. Um, and what really blew my mind was I talked to Tom Crine about it, and he was like, "That's primarily what I use." And it was serrated, which was my big hang up. He's like, "Hey, your belts will last longer. I don't have any issues with my grinds. I mean, Tom's got some of the cleanest grinds I've ever seen." Um, and his vote of confidence was something that steered me in a direction I might not have otherwise gone. So I picked up the wheel. I'm still playing with it. I'm still like getting used to it. But um, were it not for the shows, that wouldn't have been a conversation I would have had with him. Could I have messaged him and asked him a direct question? Absolutely, but it just wouldn't have come up. So it's worth it to take advantage of the opportunity to just talk to these other makers. If you come back from a show and you don't have more tricks up your sleeve than you did when you got there, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, and I think that that's something also that, with the motivation to sell knives, the being like the primary
Hmm.
focus. Everybody's like, oh, a show is to sell knives, like that's all I'm supposed to do. You
Hmm.
lose the mentality of being able to take advantage of the networking component, the knowledge component, and really, if I think about it, I in some of these shows as a big been a new show maker over the years. I've lost
Hmm.
money going to the show, not selling
Yes.
out, things like that, whatever, like those things that if you focus on them they're negatives. But if I
Yeah.
pivot that thought process and I think about all the networking and knowledge I've gained and everything, I have always
Hmm.
banked on those shows, like always banked on them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's why I tell people every chance I get, go. If you, especially if you're a new maker, if you are just starting it out, if you've got like a drawer full of files and a bench vise, go to these shows because there's no substitute for putting your eyes on this stuff and your hands on it and talking to all these people. You don't get there without absorbing all that knowledge. And that's really that's the value of attending.
Yeah, my very first dedicated knife show was actually one that the 100 percenters group had put on in Plano, Texas.
Mhm.
And you're like there's not that many at the show. Maybe there was less than 20 guys, right? Maybe
Yeah.
12 total. And all of
Yeah.
them are like at the pinnacle of like doing everything by hand and sole authorship and whatnot, right? And you look at their work, and if you base that show off of like staying in knives and being motivated and everything, you'll quickly lose the luster, right? um
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
because I don't know, like Overinder was there, Johnny Stout was there. There's a few other makers that are just like
Mhm.
phenomenal, out of the Texas area, and it was a good show. But it was also like, when I felt those knives, I went back and I was like, I'm doing something wrong, because when I felt their knives, it they hmm, it's hard to describe, but I mean, you know what it's like when you feel a knife that is like
Yeah.
it hits on all those points. The balance is great,
Hmm.
the ergonomics are phenomenal, and then
Yep.
you compare that to the price point and everything. I was like, well, I can't really expect to sell a $800 to $1,000 knife or whatever, and not
Hmm.
incorporate these things that like to me they just feel beautiful and natural. And so that
Yeah.
was really good for me. I went back and I said, something's not right. And I think it's, these things are like not contouring my handles to the best of my ability. The fit and finish could be better and whatnot. And I took a lot from that.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's interesting. Kind of on that note, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the Bark River grind-in. I know that we were talking about that a little like
Yeah.
before we started, but in the progression of like shows and experience and the culture of things, I've always been interested
Hmm.
in the culture that Bark River creates around their fans, and
Hmm.
also around the maker culture, right? And
Yeah.
my understanding is like, so once a year, right, you guys get together in Michigan at their location, right? And there's a bunch of
Yeah.
people, and you grind knives and have camaraderie and whatnot, and eat food, and eat, drink, and are merry. And can you
Yeah.
like talk to me a little bit about like that experience, like what it is, some of the maybe lesser known things about it, and just kind of give the listeners a little bit more of an idea about what it is.
Absolutely. And I don't, nor have I ever worked at or for Bark River. Mike, Jimmy, I love you guys. I will do my best to speak on your behalf. Um, what they do is throughout the year, and they actually do two of them. They do one in June, one in September. And throughout the year, they set aside knife blanks from production, whether it's, hey, we have a couple of extra Auroras, instead of building them out, just set them aside for grinding, or here's this Bravo and something weird happened at water jet, and it's got a weird notch in it, so it's out of spec, but someone can grind it into something else, as like a project knife at grind in, so throw it on the pile. So when people show up for grind in, you get in touch with Bark River, you ask for a spot for a ticket, they'll sell you one for, I want to say it's just under 400 bucks. And that includes the cost of the knife you're going to build, as well as the meals which are catered. I think it's like they do a light lunch and they cater dinners, Friday night, Saturday. Um, and you show up day one, they say, okay, you're good to go. You're all signed up. Go to this table and pick out your knife blank. And you pick out your knife blank. Once you find something you want to make or make into something else, um, you they take you off to your handle material, which is a room that's like the size of my kitchen. It's enormous, and it's just full of everything from huge sheets of micarta to, horn and bone and stabilized wood, everything cool that you could think of. And you pick out your handle material. And there are some upcharges involved in some of that stuff. I mean, they're going to charge you more for stag than they will for micarta, but that's just the way of it. Um, so once you pick your stuff out, you start your build, and they will. If you know nothing or have no interest in physically doing anything yourself, that's fine, because they walk you through just like it's uh, a production knife. They'll take you over to where they're fitting and drilling handle scales. They'll get your handles drilled and cut. And you can just stand there and watch the people do their thing, or if you want, you can try and jump on a machine and play around a little bit. But they walk you through start to finish. Bark River does everything backwards. They put a totally finished handle on a knife and then grind the blade. It just suits their convexing style, the way they do things. It just works for them that way. But you'll go through start to finish. They'll build your knife for you. Another cool thing is they've always got a few custom makers hanging around to help out, like me. And part of the reason we're there is just relief. Like, okay, if the hafting line is really backed up, then I'll just grab someone out of line, say, you come with me. And instead of them having to go down the steps, I will finish their handle out for them. Um, but if you can kind of sweet talk one of those makers, whether it's me, Matt Martin, Donovan Phillips, any of the regulars that show up, the Seven Forge guys, they will sometimes do cool stuff for you. Donovan is famous for tapering tanks for people while he's there. I'll do a hollow grind if I can find a machine that is suitable to that, um, that kind of thing. And more importantly, much like a knife show, you're getting to meet all of these people that you interact with online all the time, because they have a really good community, a couple of different Facebook groups that they run. And all these people. You see them talk all the time and sharing photos and razzing each other. And so it's like meeting all your knife maker buddies, all your knife friends in person, and eating and drinking and being merry, like you said. It's a lot of fun. It's exhausting. You're always covered in dust by the end of it, but I would not miss one, if I had the choice. They're awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty rad. I mean, it's it's interesting because um, with the social media and everything, you have the ability to kind of see what that culture is like. But then I see all these pictures from grind
Mhm.
and whatnot. I'm just like, man, that seems like an awful lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's As a knife maker, candidly, it's fun to play with someone else's belts. Um, and I've never known Mike to be stingy about it, and I'm sure financially they do just fine that weekend. But like, it, you know, if I'm doing a handle and I want to nail it for somebody, and they're the customer, and they want the best experience, the best product they can get, I get up past 400 grit, and I'm burning a fresh belt for every handle I do. I'm not trying to stretch a 1200 grit belt to do a second handle. I grab another one because I want a perfect glassy finish on this handle and tang. I can get it that way. Because subconsciously, I'm not worrying about the cost of the belt because I'm not paying for it. And that would be a problem if there were like 12 Alex Harrisons there. But just me doing handles for people at my pace one at a time is not enough to make a meaningful dent in their supply. It makes a big difference giving people a better product.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I noticed about like the community around Bark River is a lot of the time they're also heavy consumers of their knives. And so if you think
Hmm.
about it, it's great marketing as well as community building, because these are the same people that are coming back to Bark River, and they get to see their operation, they get to know where their knives come from, and then they're also the ones that are then repurchasing blades and collecting them and whatnot. And I
Yeah,
think it's cool that they're willing to invest back in that culture that helps to support them and everything. It's a great strategy, but more than that, I think it's a great testament to how much they appreciate their customer base.
it is. Yeah. Um, and I think another thing I failed to mention is if you are a newer knife maker, if you are just getting into it, if you're really, it doesn't matter what level you're at because they do everything so different there. It is like drinking through a fire hose, exposing yourself to so many different methods, not just their production stuff. I mean, you walk into their grinding room and production is going on, but then you've got Donovan Phillips and Matt Martin and Jimmy Stewart all standing at grinders doing stuff, and you can watch them do stuff in ways that doesn't occur to you. Like, I mean, Donovan gets his tangs when he tapers a tang down to like six, seven thousandths of an inch, and he does it perfect every time. If I know how to taper a tang, I could taper a tang. When I was there and I had my apprentice with me, I told her to watch Donovan because he could taper a tang, and that's the beauty of it. There's skills to pick up from everyone there. Jimmy Stewart will show you the Bark River way to do something, as well as the Jim Stewart custom shop way to do something, and they inform one another. But obviously, there's a higher level of refinement and skill coming from Jimmy than from one of the guys that works on the line, just by virtue of the fact that those are two different tiers of product. And it's really cool to see that distinction and pick up all these tricks. I think I learned about oh, what's the stuff? The Formax stuff, Satin Glow, the really low grit abrasive compound that you can load up a wheel with. I had no idea that was a thing, and they use it for everything. That's how they grind their blades past, like 400 grit with Satin Glow. And it's a Swiss Army knife, and it really makes a huge difference in your shop if you can incorporate it into your process. And it's stuff like that, tricks that you couldn't pick up if you didn't stand there and watch it, that really make it worth the experience. It's a pretty cheap trip if you can get up there too. I mean, there are no nice hotels in Escanaba, so they're all cheap. I stay at the Travel Lodge. The fee to get in my opinion, isn't that big because it includes the knife that you get to build. It's probably more cost effective. You get more bang for your buck from a learning standpoint at grind in versus going to a show. Do both, but I think that's a better place. That's why I took my apprentice up there this last time because she absorbed everything she possibly could and was a better knife maker for it at the end of it.
Yeah, that's rad. Um, and I mean, I can imagine too, like the networking component. I'm really big about when you have knife makers that are kind of in your whirl, right? Like
Mhm.
they have aesthetics that you like, and they have a different way of thinking. And when you have like a group of people that you're friends with, that's kind of like the tide that raises all boats, and you could just like brainstorm different ideas and things, and ask them, which it's a little bit different, than going to like one of the old timers and saying, "Hey, how do I do this thing?" They're like, "Okay, well,
Yeah.
it's like, this is the way that I do things, and there's some different ideas." And I've always appreciated being able to talk to old guard knife makers about things, but
Mhm.
there's also like the portion um of like the being raised by your peers, that to me sometimes is a little bit more relevant to like what it is that we're doing inside of our knives, inside of this knife culture and whatnot. And it
Yeah.
also, I feel a little bit less bad. Like if there's something that I'm asking Steve Johnson about, that it's like, "Oh, how do you taper your tanks, Steve Johnson?" Right? And he's like, "Well, I do it this way."
Yeah.
He'll still tell you, but then I feel bad because like he spent all this time answering a question, and he's probably has everybody asking him a bunch of stupid questions all the time. Whereas I don't
Yeah.
feel as bad about something like asking you or Matt or something like that, because
Yeah.
there might be times when I'm doing something specifically and you're going to ask it. Like I guess there's like a social exchange where we kind of all ask each other stupid questions, so it makes us the makes the questions not so stupid, I guess.
Yeah. exactly. It's especially in that context. It's a more informal thing. Um, and I consider myself on the novice end of the spectrum of people that show up to grind in. But when you're standing next at a grinder next to someone who's also at a grinder, it's it's easier to just ask, hey, how you doing that? What are you using? Or like just stare at someone's wrists for a minute and it not be weird because you're trying to see how they're doing something. um, Donovan and I were talking, and we came up with this sort of ism to share with learners, and it's if you're grinding a blade, um, it's your hips, your knees, your ankles. If you're shaping a handle, that's all your wrists. You're using the same tool, but they're two very, very different skill sets and different motions, different things that you're doing. And you don't really have that revelation until you're standing there watching someone else do the same thing in a different way, you know?
Yeah, and I came to that realization probably like the hundredth time that somebody asked me how to grind a blade freehand, right? Because like with
Hmm.
the newer knife makers, the concept of freehand seems like you're building the Sistine Chapel, and
Yeah.
it's like they'd previously been using a jig, or maybe they are not just used to a single style of hand grinding. And
Hmm.
to me, it's like everything that is associated with grinding blades comes from core, right? Like your feet
Yeah.
all the way up, and then if you um, I think the best way to describe it for people who are listening is there's a few things that you want to be able to accomplish in grinding a blade, right?
Hmm.
Obviously, it's the variability of being able to make minor adjustments to your grind and use your machinery to remove material, but it's also in
Hmm.
maintaining that consistent flow from your plunge all the way to your tip, and
Hmm.
that is a body motion, and it
Yeah.
requires being in tune with what the flow of your body is, how the grinder is responding, how the steel is responding, and when you kind of get into that, and you can do freehanding, then you can go anywhere and
Hmm.
grind. Whereas if you're using jigging and a lot of tooling, then you lose the ability um, to have the kind of fine motor skills to just hop from grinder to grinder and do those things. So it's way more
Yep.
versatile. Like um, I don't knock jigs or using tooling or any type of thing like that. But
Yeah, not at
I
all.
mean, and yeah, I want to be like very clear with people. Like for me, it's like such a non-issue that I don't think that like anybody would argue that a milling machine is cheating, right? but but
Right.
technically you're letting a machine do a portion of the work for you that you could do with a drill
Yeah.
press, or you could do with files. So um
Yep.
it's like if a jig helps to maintain consistent grinds, and that is a part of your aesthetic and you want consistency, then by all means do it. If you want to do CNC or
Yeah.
something like that, like by all means do it. It's like I don't attribute a certain value system to doing everything by yourself, but I know that there's lots of mentalities out there, and I am but one.
Yeah, it's to me, it's about your end product. You owe it to your customers who are spending their hard-earned money on your product to make them the best thing you can. And if you, with your skill set and your tools and your methodology, make the best knife you can with a CNC machine, then that's what you should be doing. The only, in my opinion, the only rocky territory you get into is if you are dishonest about that. Like, oh, I freehand grind everything because some people think that that's awesome, that's cool, but you're using a jig for something. Um, if you are misleading about how you're actually accomplishing a task, then you got a problem. But it's not that hard to be transparent, and no one's gonna care. You're not gonna. Oh, if people knew that I was using a jig, they wouldn't want to buy my knife. There's one guy out there somewhere that will honestly have that feeling. They're having a conversation about your knife with you in the first place because they like it and you're already there. So don't let that be a hang up for you as a newer maker or as a developing maker or as a seasoned maker. Make the best knife you can. How you do that is incidental, in my opinion. I think you and I kind of see eye to eye on that.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. Um, so like the natural progression of Bark River grind-ins is kind of in what you've been doing behind the scenes with your like drop culture, right?
Yeah.
And so for anybody who's interested, I can't say that it's a really a new thing. The drop, as it were, is common across the industry. But basically the collection of a bunch of things and then a sale all at the same time, so people could just like fist fight to get to them. And in the knife culture, there are a few companies that do drops really well for knife makers, and DLT is one of them, of course. And my understanding is like you just had one, and I kind of want to go through some of the experience of preparing for drops, how to get into them,
Hmm.
what the after effect is, if you're okay talking about that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Um, so I sent a newer model to Jason at DLT, and we dropped a small number of them. I think there were less than 50 of them. Um, and they are not sold out. I didn't expect them to sell out right away. They are, as far as I know, moving. Jason is the kind of guy, he would let me know if there were a problem. And he has kind of dispelled this illusion to me early on. If you're not selling out right away on a drop as a newer maker, that doesn't mean that you're a failure. And I have internalized that and rationalized it to the point where I accept that, um, because frankly, the guy who knows the business is still confident in the product. Um, so that's one thing you don't, it's much like a show. That's the biggest thing to get out of your head. Don't worry about how your drop is going to do. Worry about whether the guy who bought your product from you is happy. And if he is, then uh, you don't have an issue. Um, the people who have them in their hands are pretty happy with them. The ones who don't yet will be when they get them. I was happy with them when they left my shop. I made one for myself and carry it around, and I like it a lot. Uh, so those are the things that I have to remind myself anytime I'll get on DLT and look like, oh yeah, they just got them in stock. Um, on the reverse end of that, it's nice for me to be able to tell someone, yeah, if you're interested, they're in stock. DLT's got them. I'm not, it's the only way to get one of my knives is not show up at a show or wait X amount of months on my list or try and snag one on the secondary. They're available, they're out there. And there is something to be said for that. Supply and demand has like a sweet spot, on the bell curve. Um, I don't know whether that is the flavor of answer you were getting at. It's just kind of what came out. Is that kind of what you were angling towards?
Sure, I can ask follow-up questions.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, I don't really think so much about like whether drops sell out or things. They're not Taylor Swift tickets, right?
Right.
Yeah, and that's something that I think that people have to be aware of, is that regardless, like regardless of whether you're selling them at shows or selling like listing them yourself
Mhm.
online, or whether you're working with a dealer to do drops or whatever, like the sales component again is something that is ancillary to the work that you're putting out. If you sell to somebody like DLT and they buy all of your stuff and they sell out immediately, great, you probably have a repeat
Yeah.
a buyer, right?
Yeah.
if if they buy your stuff and take a risk on you, and it takes like 2-3 years for them to sell them, then probably that relationship is not going to be as great.
Exactly.
um but and I think that that's one thing that I've tried to convey through the show, is that dealers play a really important part, I think, in the ecosystem of of marketing and of proliferating a maker's work and being able to connect people. They are like liaisons, and yeah, they
Yep.
make money. They make money, right? That
Hmm.
they wouldn't be in the business and do this stuff if they weren't.
Right.
But like I've early days of knives, I heard people like turning their nose up to dealers all the time. Like if they were at a show and a dealer came by and said, "Okay, hey, I'll buy what you have," and
Uh,
ask for a discount or whatever, so they buy all of them. People would be like, know what? Like I'm not going to do that. I could sell them at home, and then they spend the next like 6 months selling their own stuff, and they could have just sold to like a DLT or something like that. Like if a dealer's coming up to you and being like and willing to buy your stuff,
hmm
then I consider that a feather in the cap.
I agree.
But
Yeah.
I mean, kind of on that note though, um, I see the size of drops are pretty variable, right? I mean, when somebody's really aggressive like you might have like, 35, 50 to 50 blades or whatever that you're spending a considerable amount of time storing and building for a drop. There's others that maybe they get 10 knives out there and it's kind of like test the waters with a dealer. And I see a
Mhm.
lot of variability. Like what I saw like the kind of build along process when you were like updating that you had drops, like when you were, kind of socializing that. What like
Yeah.
that's a lot of knives. It's a lot of knives to invest in. It's a lot of knives to
Yes.
make. It's like you have a lot put into that stuff. Like what goes through your head when you're just like beating out a bunch of those blades and finishing them all for a drop itself?
Well, when I hit the sweet spot, I'll tell you. Um, the first one I did for Jason was 10 pieces, and I had never done anything like that before, and they were very involved builds for me at my skill set at that time. So it took me forever, and it was laborious, and it was a lot. This latest run that I did, because I sent him about 50 crow, and then I sent him another 35-ish patrol scalpels that he has not dropped yet, but he's going to. So all at once, I sent him like 85-ish knives. That was too much. And I learned that now after the fact, after I had done it. Like me doing still in my shop part time because I still have my job, working at a breakneck pace, cranking out 85 knives. Took me about 6 weeks. It was entirely too much. That being said, it also taught me that doing 20, 25 pieces, not that big a deal. That's a manageable quantity for me with my methods, and that's not where every single step becomes frustrating and boring and so on. That's about the number of knives that I'm building for this show coming up, and those aren't all the same like the Crow, where every knife is different. But working on 25 knives at the same time, um, I can. I think for me right now as a part timer, a begrudging part timer, that's kind of my sweet spot. And every maker will have that. You will at some point with if you're working in quantity, you're doing small batch production, bite off more than you can chew. And when you're building a quantity that's like, okay, this is not fun. I'm not enjoying this. I just spent an hour cutting and chamfering pins. That's that's when you know to back off. And as time goes by, that number may go up, but because it did for me. But listen to yourself because if you're not having fun, then what's the point, right? Um, find your sweet spot and do it that way. Because once you do, then you're cooking with gas. You're having a good time. You're enjoying yourself in the shop. You've got a challenge, and you can kind of dial in your methods within that. Like I know how to grind a crow. I can grind a crow better now because I just made 50 of them. Right. The the first one I made had good grinds. The 50th one had really good grinds, and they're all up to spec. But not only did that 50th one have the best grinds within that margin, it probably took the least amount of time too, because of repetition and because of building that muscle memory and really intimately understanding that build and how it is. It'll do that for you. So building stuff in small batches will make you faster. It'll make you more comfortable biting off uh, big chunks of work like that, and it will teach you what's too much, what's your sweet spot. That's something you pay attention to. Don't just, oh, last time I did 10 knives, so now I got to do 15. Last time I did 15, now I got to do 20. Don't keep ramping up because you think you have to ramp up. You will hit the point of diminishing return.
Yeah. For most shows, and I know these are like rookie numbers, but for most shows, I've usually hit under 10 knives that I've brought. And I don't know whether that's
Mhm.
like I used to get into the mentality where I would bring like a few of everything that I thought I could make, right? And when you're talking about
Right.
um, some of the materials that I was using, and then doing like bolster work and hand rub finishes and everything, like it just takes the time that it takes. And so there were certain
Yeah.
limitations I was putting on myself because uh I don't know. I don't know why. But like I have this run, like I have a show. It's actually this weekend as we're recording this thing. But I I I
Mm.
I can't say I waited till the last minute. I waited until I had the time to actually make stuff for the show, and then more life stuff got in the way.
Right.
But I've been kind of like trying to figure out how within a few days can I have everything that I build to specification, and yet still have enough numbers to provide variety. Because I'm like, well, okay, if I only have like 5 knives, then
Right.
I can just bring those. But I am looking at a few things like, am I bringing any type of knives that offer variety in like my price point and the finishes that I do and things like that?
Mm.
And I just didn't think it was fair to not bring anything, or to only bring like a very small amount. So kind of what I think about is like my processes and
Right.
how I could still do the kind of quality that I'm looking at. And there's this like weird paradigm when you're kind of like stressed to do something, right? There's a deadline, you're right around the corner. Innovation happens in the time when like the tiger is right by you, ready to pounce, right? And I felt like, one thing that
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been thinking about doing for a while is some bead blasting or media blasting finishes, right? And one thing that I've always noticed with small knives is that sometimes, depending on your hand size, they can be hard to hold on to. So, like things like lanyards,
Mhm.
ergonomic grips, how you do things can change that. But one great thing about a beaded finish is that it's very tactile, especially when wet. And like there's pros
Yep.
and cons, right? Like there's a satin finish is a really great sweet spot because it's not a really brittle finish, in that it gets like really scratched up and everything, but it also is reasonably easy to handle. And when you go down to like a bead or
Mhm.
media finish, like oils and things like that, you see them on the knife, and so you got to clean it up, or they get scuffed, or the sheath imparts its a color or whatever. Like
Yeah.
there's all sorts of like things that you have to like look at and say, hey, like the pro versus the con of a finish. But I've actually really enjoyed the process of learning that of like what I can do with the base finish being blasted, right? And then other things I can do,
Right.
like doing a bead finish and then tumbling it and doing like an acid wash, or things like that. Like there's all sorts of other things that you could do. Not everything has to be like the most laborious hand rub finish. That people don't want to pay the price tag for the time it takes to do that stuff. And not every knife requires that. Some people like don't want to buy a knife or use a knife because they think it's too pretty. Like you put a lot of time in it, they'll buy it and they'll put it away, but they won't use it because it does have that
Yep.
that 1,000 or 1,200 grit hand rub finish, and really shiny bolsters and stuff. So I kind of think about that as like what's emerged out of some of these processes of speeding up, and I'm slowing down and thinking about, well, hey, is the way that I've made knives the only way to make them, or is there other finishing techniques that I can use that lend themselves more to a market that I want to carry my knives and use them every day versus collect them.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to remember, you and I make knives very, very different. And I admire the lengths you go to hand finish a piece. You do a lot of hand finishes, and I don't. I have done them. I can do them. They're not my preferred method. Um, but you don't hand finish a knife to cover up a crappy satin grind. You, Aaron, start with a perfect satin grind and then hand finish. So when you're talking about adjusting your methods for time constraints, price constraints, or to just kind of meet a different demographic, meet a different target, you got to remember that if you make knives as cleanly as you do, then a satin finish, like a belt satin, is still acceptable, and it's not inferior in any way, because it is very difficult to get a clean belt satin. There are people out there that will do a hand rub to cover up a less than perfect belt satin. And because I've seen your belt finishes, if you can come right off the grinder at whatever grit and have a good looking satin, you got something going for you. And that takes just as much, if not more, skill. It just takes less time, which is really only a benefit for you. It's just like the way I do my handles. Unless I have some specific reason to hand rub a handle, I don't. I use slack belts all the way up to 2000 grit. I use the Bark River method for finishing handles. And I go from 2000 grit off the slack belt straight to the buffing compound. And it's not that that is the easy way, because it's not easy. It is for me because I've developed the skill, but it took me a long time to teach myself how to get into all these weird curves and irregular organic shapes with different belts, uh, to get those scratches out of there. But now that that's something I'm comfortable with, if it makes a clear finish, it makes a clear finish. And if it looks good, then how do you shake a stick at it? If you can take a micarta handle off the belt at 2K and go straight to the polishing wheel, polish it up, and it's glassy smooth and it looks done, you don't have any latent scratches. How can you say that just because it took less time, it's not as good or it's not worth as much? So you got to wire your brain to think of quality of product, not intrinsic value of a given method. Those are two different things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and there's like with these witches fingers, I got 8 out and
Those are
everything like
so
that.
cool.
Well, but like the thing about those is uh they they're modeled off of cheek knives for caping, right? A lot of my
Mm,
knives come from hunting type of use and everything. And so like when you're caping animals, you have to get up in the nostrils sometimes and get all the skin out and whatnot to be able to send it off to tannery. And
yeah.
and so they're mini scalpels. Like I mean, I have lots of renditions of scalpely things. And um the one thing I did with those is that I wanted to do a skeletonized thing, which I don't do a lot of.
Mhm.
and
Right.
and there's a lot of dynamics to skeletonized that you don't think of. Like I have slices all up and down my thumb because I took a skeletonized, like not finished and was like fitting sheets and doing prototypes on what I wanted them to be. And off the surface grinder, they were so sharp at the edge that I was like slicing up my thumb, right? and I
Yeah.
and I looked at it. I was like, "There is no way." Like that's the first thing that I'm going to address when I get done with these things. So I'm going to knock all those corners off and make it incredibly smooth in the hand, right?
Hmm.
And you don't think as much about that because really, like when you handle stuff, because if you put a handle on it, that covers up everything from the ricasso down to the end of the knife. And so, like in
Yeah.
fixed blades and whatnot, there's things that you don't think about. But you know, like if you like in handling versus skeletonized. But one thing that I actually did, uh I used it quite a bit in making slip joints, is using a a fiber wheel. I mean, it's basically a Scotch Brite wheel to soften the
Mhm.
edges of the tang on slip joints, right? So
Mhm.
like you have your kick and everything, and if you if you can soften it a little bit, it makes the action a lot smoother. So you don't do it too much, but you do it just enough. And an ultra fine Scotch Brite wheel on the buffer helps that, and you can just zip it off real quick. Um,
Mhm.
but with those skeletonized designs, I can knock off the corners of those in the same way that I was knocking off the corners in the slip joints, and it made for a very smooth finish. So I did all of those things, and then I media blasted them. So like, I think that the bevels were up to 400 grit before they get media blasted, and all the corners are knocked off, and all the lanyard holes are chamfered and everything. And you have to think about what that base thing is, and then your finish is just kind of like an aesthetic thing on top of that. It's not really meant to hide
Right.
anything.
I agree. I think you're and now you're getting into a discussion of function and form and those things kind of coexisting. And I know to the same point, I started doing kind of rounding off or crowning the spines on my fixed blades, like the spine of the blade forward of the handle. And it makes a big difference when you rest your thumb there. It's little stuff like that that makes a big difference. And it's you have to learn that the hard way. You have to finish that knife, put your hands on it, and say, that's not super comfortable. I need to think of a way to remedy that. But it also has to fit within uh, your fit and finish methods. You can't take that finished knife, lay it flat against the platen, and then roll it all the way till it's flat again. You'll get a perfectly rounded spine, but you'll also scratch the crap out of your the flats on your blade. Um, there's a lot of little finesse stuff that you kind of have to teach yourself through trial and error. And really, I think when you're getting a custom made knife and when you're getting a knife from someone who's been doing it for a while, that's what you're paying them for. It's the little stuff that they have developed and learned that makes such a huge difference that nobody else would have ever figured out any other way except to make hundreds and hundreds of knives, right? Um, so it and you may not notice it, you may not know what happens, but it's a reality during the building process and the when you get that tool that you put in your hand for the first time and your hand just melts around it, that's what that's what you're paying for, and that's how those things come to fruition. The you know Lovelace rounding off the choil forward of his guards on his dropped hunter. You don't touch that. Your hand doesn't go there. It's not a user interface part of the knife. It's just a detail that one aesthetically looks awesome, and two fits into his philosophy of the only sharp thing on the blade on the knife is the edge. And a detail like that is something that sets a a true seasoned craftsman apart from a hobbyist. You know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because there's also all sorts of like tells to a maturity level of a maker. I think,
Mhm.
I mean, grind lines being even is like a pretty straightforward thing, but there's lots of
Yeah.
um, makers that don't think of those things. Like if you like, it doesn't change the functionality of a knife if they're a thousandths off in geometry or something like that, or a few thousandths even. But there
Mhm.
are elements that you can see where if you think about a knife build from start to finish and you have parameters that you have to follow, constraints on design or principles that you have, a very seasoned knife maker is going to hit all of those, and anything less than that is going to be skipped.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one thing that I've always appreciated about um, top tier makers is there's never a situation where things uh, leave their shop or whatever and do not meet the standards that they personally set for
Yep.
themselves.
Everything on that work product is intentional. Every surface has attention paid to it. There are no shortcuts in any of the steps. Guys like um, Jimmy Stewart, Jim Skelton, Matt Martin, Donovan Phillips, because he keeps coming up. Any of the real hard hitters, and then more to your circle, guys like Gary Langley, guys like um, oh, who were we just talking about? Steve Johnson. Steve Johnson. They set themselves apart that way, uh, because of that unflinching attention to detail and adherence to the standards that they set, and doing everything their one right way every time. That's how they develop that reputation for having these flawless pieces of artwork that they
Yeah.
create.
I actually, funny kind of like circumstance around understanding people's um like their level of detail or whatever, and then I'm also thinking about price point is there's a new group that I'm on Facebook that's fixed blade fanatics and fiends or something like that. I forget what the name is exactly, right?
Right.
And some of the custom slip joint guys wanted to start that to talk about fixed blades, but kind of from the context of they already used to slip joints, right? And
Yeah.
Trip Miller is a collector. I've had him on the show. He was selling some knives for a friend, and James Sponigal, I think he's in Tennessee. If I no, maybe Virginia. I can't remember exactly where. I bought a dropped hunter from Trip through this thing, and I looked at it. It was a phenomenal build, like every way, shape, and form. It is an iconic dropped, right? Taper
Right.
tang is perfect, and his mirror polish is perfect. His solders on the guard look great. Just everything. There's not any scratches because it's a mirror polish, but there's nothing that's out of place. And I went and looked at on
Right.
his website, and this guy is selling that same type of thing for less than $450.
How?
He makes the knives that he wants to make, and he prices them the way that makes sense to him. I actually I took it on
Right.
on this gator hunt that I did recently, and it was useful in some ways.
Mhm.
This is not like a large animal by any means. Like it was like 6.5 foot
Right.
alligator that I ended up getting. So I didn't really need anything that big. I actually used my scalpel to test out some of the ergonomics on a reptilian creature because I've used them
Mhm.
in deer and whatnot, but it's a little bit different trying to skin scaly things.
Well, it's just gratifying using your knife for stuff too. I get that.
Yeah. But it's always like research and development for me, right?
Right.
But I used the knife, and then I called him up and I was like, "Hey, I took a picture with your knife that you made and the skater and everything. I thought it was real cool. You want me to send it to you?" And we're talking about things, and he's asking me questions about different steel types and things like that I'm using as a younger maker, and asking me questions. And I just wanted to
Mhm.
talk to him and say, "Dude, I appreciated the craftsmanship of your knife, and it was great to carry and everything like that." And um, I sometimes wonder with people that make knives and to the standard that they do, how they can manage to make them so affordably. Like $450
Mhm.
to me is crazy. I know lots of like
Yeah.
the top end drop hunter makers are usually selling for 14 1600 $2,000.
And they're
um
worth that. Yeah.
yeah, and he is like $450. I thought it was insane. I would have paid twice that easy for that same blade. It was really,
Oh,
really
absolutely.
beautiful work.
Yeah, I remember seeing the photos of it and thinking that, yeah, I should have beat you to that sales post. I was a little envious, but now that I know that, I'll probably reach out to the guy, see if I can have something made.
Yeah, well, it was actually my first dropped hunter. I've handled a bunch and
Oh,
everything like that, and
yeah.
I just have never actually personally owned one. And
Hmm.
so for my like meat hook hands, I've thought, I like the aesthetic and I like the fit in my hands so much that I actually think I'm going to start collecting dropped hunters from people, like just dropped hunters.
When are you gonna make one?
I don't know. I've been a holdout on doing a bunch of taper tang work because
Hmm.
when I got started, it was like every knife that I made, so, old guard would say, "Well, it looks nice, but it would look better with the taper tang." And I was kind of like, like it's not always necessary. Like I skeletonize my handles and stuff and reduce in
Mhm.
weight other ways that I think
Yeah.
still maintains the thickness and integrity and whatnot. And I kind of like the look too of like
Mhm.
a full tang. But I also really appreciate taper tangs. But I've tapered quite a few tangs before, and the some of the weight distribution components I are kind of marginal compared to skeletonizing a handle, reducing weight that way. So for me, it's an aesthetic choice, um,
Mhm.
probably more than it is a weight distribution choice. And I might be wrong, but there's only so much weight you can reduce from a blade. It's not like tapering a tang like halves the weight really. It doesn't seem to be that much of a difference for me.
You are wrong, and I'm going to think less of you as a person and as a man for it. What I'm hearing is, uh, after I finish building out my new workshop next month, I'm just gonna have you up, and we're gonna ruin a bunch of drop point hunters and see if we can and make some that are kind of cool. You're overdue for a visit anyway, so that's what we'll do. Um, on a serious note, yeah, I like to do both. Every handle that I do is skeletonized pretty heavily, and a bunch of weight relief drilled into it. Um, including the tapered tangs. And as we've talked about before, I very often hang my hat on how light my knives are. I don't think that as long as your balance is good, I think as light as you can get it is the goal. And I don't like necessarily having a big chunky knife in my hand. I'm not that guy. I know that's personal preference, and there are people who would say otherwise, but in my opinion, having a tapered tang makes a huge difference from a balance standpoint and a weight relief standpoint. So it's my preferred way to make a knife. I can't, I don't try and like talk people into, upselling them into a tapered tang, but that's one thing that's worth it, in my opinion. What I would tell you to do, in all seriousness, Aaron, the next time you get a chance to build a fixed blade that's not like super tiny, like your witch's finger, um, build two and make the only difference in those whether or not there's a tapered tang. Give them the same handle profile, use the same material, same height of grind, same thickness, everything. Get them as close as you can, except for that tapered tang, and just feel them, and decide whether or not it is worth the extra effort for you. Decide whether or not you enjoy that, or it's something that you prefer to omit, because you're the only person that knows what an Aaron Lavier knife is supposed to feel like. So I mean, you got to make that call.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's not me knocking taper tangs. Like, I mean, um, I appreciate them for sure. But what I'm saying is, like,
Yeah, yeah.
if you take all things into consideration, um, the majority of the weight distribution that you can take off of a blade, right? So, I mean, whatever thickness it is in the
Mhm.
amount of material that you remove from the bevel and the
Mhm.
amount of material that you remove from the handle, right?
Mhm.
And wherever your center of gravity is like the sum total of your balance between those two.
Right.
Plus your blade geometry and everything like that. And I know I'm using a lot of terms here that I'm kind of like marginalizing like the entire process of balance and aesthetic and everything, but like I'm kind of focusing on a kind of an idea, right?
Mhm.
So if you just taper a tang, right? Like just straight taper it, like your holes are there for your pins and everything,
Mhm.
and that's it. Then the amount of weight that you're removing is not exceptional. I mean, it's not. I mean, about as much as you're removing from a bevel, depending on what your blade, like your bevel lengths and everything like that are. Um,
Yeah, a lot of it depends on how much handle you've got on that given knife,
yeah, but
and how thin your teeth are.
yeah, exactly. I mean, if you want to go with if you want to go with a standard taper, rather than like a very thin one, then
Mhm.
how much material you're actually removing, skeletonizing and tapering together, like figuring out how
Mhm.
to augment the taper and everything, so it's structurally sound, but then also has a taper, and then you're also removing additional weight because of skeletonization. That's the sweet spot to me, versus just it would look better if it was tapered. I mean,
Right.
I see lots of knives that don't have tapers on them that look really great. And that's more of like the idea, I think.
So when you come out here, let's do an experiment then. Let's make a couple of knives with different variations. Let's make the same knife. Let's make like four drop point hunters, and everything from no weight relief, no tapered tang, up to weight relief holes and a tapered tang, and we'll build them out exactly the same. And then we'll measure them. We'll put them on a scale and see how much of a difference X, Y, and Z method makes. I think that would be a worthwhile experiment that would justify us, making a bunch of cool knives for ourselves too.
Yeah, I'll bring the bourbon.
Cool.
But it's interesting to me though, because I so much about knife making is anecdotal, right? It's like, people say like this would be better with a taper tang, or this would be better this way or that way or whatever, flat grind
Right.
versus hollow grind. And like, I don't know if there's a lot of science. Like, there's not Lair and Thomas's around to go over every aesthetic choice of a knife. Like,
Right.
what's better for a finish, a satin or a blast, or a polish. Gary
Uh-huh.
Langley and I talked a little bit about the concepts of high polish as it relates to blades, and I do agree in this sense that in finishing out high carbon blades,
Hmm.
especially, or lower stainlesses, that the higher the polish you can achieve on that, the smaller the porosity is, and therefore it tarnishes at a reduced rate, right?
Right.
But other than that, being kind of like a mechanism of the old guard, using steels that are not kind of like what we have now. um,
Right.
a polish at this point can be an aesthetic choice alone versus a necessity,
Mhm.
because you don't want everything like tarnishing up and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I use primarily AEBL. That's my steel, and it's not easy to get that stuff to rust. It's as long as you take marginal care of that knife, you're never gonna have that problem. But AEBL also takes a lot of different finishes really well, and if someone wants to pay me to hand polish a mirror finish on a blade, I'll do it. But I'm not going to feed them a line about the increased corrosion resistance. If they bring it up, I'll tell them, yes, technically that's true, but you're talking about diminishing returns on an already magnificent stainless steel. Um, and that goes back into the conversation about just being honest with your customers. It's that's one thing that has absolutely changed with the times, as we as an industry have moved towards more modern steels, stainless steels, and stain resistant steels, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually kind of interested. Something that I've been thinking about is some of the choices that I make in steel as it relates to how, like, the aesthetic of my knives and how easy it is to finish them out. Like, I've been
Mhm.
on S30V for quite a while.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but at the same time, like, it is almost impossible to get that stuff rusty, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's a really great steel. But it is very difficult to finish out to like high grits. It takes a lot of time, and all what you see in all my high satin finishes and everything, it's all
Mhm.
S30V.
That's insane.
But it's I mean, it's time consuming. And so, like, but kind of in this like odd, like this serendipity of making knives, what I've learned from that is how to use more of my machinery to help get the finishes, like, get it to a place where I can hand sand it, or
Mhm.
finish it out. So when you're seeing like my higher satin belt finishes and whatnot, a lot of that
Mhm.
comes from my desire just to not sit there for 4, 5, 6 hours per blade and hand sand, because
Yeah.
I hate it. I'm like,
I don't blame you one bit. I know we're talking in circles, but I think there's a lot to be said for a well done, clean belt satin. It's not easy. It's not something you should shake a stick at, and it is a show of skill.
yeah, well, I think that kind of going back to the idea of you centering yourself for grinding, when you're trying to do a hand, like a hand finish or a hand grind on a satin finish like that, the consistency of your
Hmm.
body is really paramount, because I almost kind of like
Yep.
lean into it, like I drag my body across it, so I stiffen everything up, and then drag the entire body,
Yep.
kind of like, it starts kind of in the hips, but in the upper leg, and then moves there. And so I sway with it.
Yep.
So, and that's one of the ways that like, my body is the grinding jig, and I have to figure out ways to remove
Yeah.
variables if I want to get that consistent pattern in scratches and everything like that across it. And any little bit of warble or
Yep.
anything is going to cause facets that you do not want there. And the good thing is that there's always tricks to get rid of those if you need to, right? So you can take I mean, you can do like
Yeah.
let's just say a 600 grit satin like belt finish, and then you can run
Mm-hmm.
a Scotch Brite on it. And so if you get facets, you run a
Mm-hmm.
Scotch Brite on it, and then you go back and very lightly touch it again on a fresh 600, and then you've reset your grind again.
Yep.
So there's ways that you can kind of finesse it.
Yeah. And there's more than one way to do it. My grinds got a lot better when I started paying. I started going closer to finish with 120, which is my first grit that I do. Um, and I look at my 120 grit grinds and I say, okay, could I stop now and have a passable 120 grit satin? And if the answer is yes, then I move on. I don't do 120 grit satins. I go at least to 220. But the point is, I'm not trying to clean something up on that step with the next belt up. And if you build that habit, it does make cleanup easier because if your bevel's perfect at 120, all you're doing is polishing. You're just changing the surface finish as you go up, and you can go straight to a Trizact after that, and which makes it that much easier because you know how Trizacts are. They're weird about removing material. They're awesome.
Yeah.
I don't even use. I used to religiously rely on my uh, Scotch Brite belt. That was the last step that I would do on a satin, and I kind of just drifted away from it. I don't find it necessary anymore because I have my surface finishes dialed in to my satisfaction, whether it's on the Trizact or a 400. Those are usually my two settings these days. Either I'll finish it off on whichever Trizact I have, or just a 400 grit belt. And I've been pretty happy with my results lately.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I've come to accept about Scotch Brite is that it is a magic eraser. But part of the problem with that is that it also very slightly washes out clean lines. And
A little bit, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, so I mean, it's great and it has its application, but if your aesthetic choice is to have crisp termination of lines, then it's really difficult to necessitate a Scotch Brite. If you can figure out the components or mechanisms to get a clean grind, then you don't need to magic eraser it and then try like there's no uh, what I used to do, like, quite a few years ago, is
Hmm.
I would grind my bevels, right? And then I would magic erase it with the Scotch Brite. And then in
Yeah.
order to get crisp lines again, I would throw it on the surface grinder and I would shim the blade under the
Yep.
bevel, and then I would use that instead. And I was
I've thought
like,
about doing
man, yeah, well, it does work, but then also you have like some like a lot of things can go wrong when you're surface grinding. And
that. Yeah.
like and so, like, for me, it was like, I mean, I destroyed a lot of blades that way, more than I care to admit. But you can shim things up, and you can use that process. So you get the dimensions where you want to, the grinds on the bevels and everything like that is where you want it to be, and then you shim it up and you surface grind it, and you can restore flats.
Yep.
But if you're trying to do it without doing that methodology, you put it on the flat platen or whatever, then you start diminishing um your finish, like your fit and everything, the geometry of the blade, and it's no longer like this meta geometry, right? It's, I don't know what you
Yeah.
actually call that, but like the facets of, like, this is supposed to be flat and this is supposed to be curved, and this handle area is supposed to be flat and curved and everything. And
Mhm.
when you start focusing too much on a single element, then you start making it way more difficult on yourself, and you're just always chasing a mistake versus
Yeah.
figuring out a way to do things right the first time, and then you can
Yeah.
make other aesthetic decisions.
If you start clean and you stay clean and you don't move on to the next step until what you were just doing is clean, then you don't have to play cleanup. I remember Skelton telling me, and this blows my mind. This was like such a cool, like indication of his dedication to what he does. Because anyone who's never seen his stuff or never handled it up close, Jim Skelton's fit and finish is perfect. And I remember him telling me that when he's doing flat grinds, if he's got a knife that has, a swedge and a primary bevel, so that's a total of four bevels on the knife, right? One, two on each side. The very last thing he does, if he's doing an 800 grit satin, he puts a brand new 800 grit belt on his grinder, takes one pass on that bevel with it, takes it off, puts a new 800 grit belt on, takes one pass on the swedge, takes it off. He burns a fresh 800 grit belt for one pass on each facet of that knife, and that's how he gets his grind lines crispy, crispy, crispy. And it's unbelievable him telling me that. I'm like, dude, how much money are you spending on belts? He's like, you don't want to know, but it clearly is a method that works for him because his grinds are perfect. And if that's the case, how do you shake a stick at it? You know?
Well, yeah, and yeah, I actually when he moved from Texas to the East Coast,
Hmm.
right before that, I was up at his shop helping him with a bandsaw or something like that. I forget what it was.
Yeah.
His shop actually is very minimal compared to what I was used to. Like I had a lot of different machines and stuff. He has actually very simple machines. And for him to be able to output that kind of quality with
Yeah.
minimal equipment shows
Yeah.
that he knows how to use his machinery really well,
Oh
right?
yeah.
But like there's all like we could probably talk an extensive amount about abrasive behavior, right?
Mhm.
But like when he's told me about like using a single belt for a type of finish, I started paying more attention to the way that abrasive was acting with different types.
Yeah.
So my starting abrasive is a ceramic 50 grit, right?
Okay.
I've actually thought about the fact that sometimes I'm grinding a blade to get rid of those 50 grit scratches when
Hmm.
what I probably could be doing is using an 80 grit. And then the difference between 80 and 100, 120 grit is not that much of a difference.
Yeah.
I like being able to like hog material off and then, finesse the rest of it. But at 50 is very aggressive. I used to, when I was doing like quarter inch blades, I would use 36 grit. And
Mhm.
man, it's like, it's chasing an awful lot of very deep scratches. And I
Yes.
learned, Tim Robertson told me about, well, when you have a fresh grit, just zip a piece of steel over it to knock all
Hmm.
the peaks off of it, and you're dressing your wheel, you're dressing
Hmm.
your abrasive to be able to do the grit work that it's impregnated with and not have all those peaks and everything. And I was like, oh, well, that
Yep.
just solved a ton of problems for me.
Even at 2000 grit with the micron belts that I get from Phoenix Abrasives, and Jimmy taught me this the last time I was up there. If you're doing a handle with your 2000 grit belt, before you touch the scale, um, dress your the belly of your tang with that 2000 grit belt, that fresh one, because it'll knock the highs off of there and it'll be more agreeable for the rest of your handle material. And at 2000 grit, you're only getting one knife out of that belt, but you're not undoing what you just did with your 1200 grit belt because the belt is brand new and it's more aggressive than you want it to be. So yeah, there's something to be said for dressing your belts before you use them. You're not wrecking them, you're not costing it life for no reason. You're evening out all those highs because the abrasive is imperfect. If you put it under a microscope, you can see how irregular it is. Um, and like sharpening, I sharpen with a clapped out belt. It just makes a better edge in my opinion. There's different belts have different values at different stages in their lives, and once you start learning that, you have some possibilities and some capabilities that open up for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I know some makers that will their all their used belts they'll have on a pile, and then they'll let new makers or whatever who want to kind of play around with things
Mhm.
pilfer it. But I'll tell you, like most of the belts in my shop are wore out. They're like a village bicycle by the time that I get done with them.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
nothing left on them. And it's not because I overuse a belt. It's
Hmm.
because I use it for different purposes and
Yeah.
maximize it. So, like I use a used belt, usually like a used 220,
Hmm.
to do the initial sharpening edge on my blades.
Right.
And then and so it'll get sharpened with that. And if I really want like somewhere closer to a mirror polish on it, I'll do like a 4 or 600
Hmm.
after the fact. But everything is initially ground with a used 220, which
Right.
arguably probably closer to a 320, almost a 400, with all like most of it the abrasive being used up. But like aluminum oxide, what, two and a half, $3 for a belt.
Yeah,
um,
they're not super expensive.
yeah, I get more concerned with ceramics because yeah, $8 belt or more.
Yep.
I'm wanting to get some mileage out of that. But most of what I do with ceramics is only steel removal,
Mm.
because I'm running it at high RPM. So like the thing is like 65 to 80%, almost max speed on my grinder. And I'm just
Right.
using it to stock remove. And then the rest of like the Trizacs and the aluminum oxides and everything like that, like any micron belts that I'm using are all for the fine work. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so when I use my 36 grit ceramics, when they're new, they're pretty much reserved for handle material. And then once they're kind of clapped out and I start getting some resistance and some burning when I'm hogging handle material, then that turns into a steel grinding belt for profiling and that kind of thing, cleaning up cleaning up parts. Um, the 120s, the only thing I use them for are my bevels because I will take a clapped out 36 grit and grind my lead ends just to, break the 45s and get to my edge thickness. And then after that, I go straight to the 120 and I grind my bevels with 120. So I don't have to worry about 60, 80 grit scratches at all because they don't exist on the knife. Um, and then I just start, you know, finishing them up from there. But that's the only one that I really burn through at a higher rate than I would like because they are expensive. And depending on the knife I'm like the Crow, I think I got 10 of those out of a 120 grit belt, and those are small. They're not large knives.
hmm.
Um, and so I had to spend, close to $50 in belts just to do that set of knives, just to grind the primary bevels on them. But like you said, everything else, even though you're burning through like the 400 grit belts, I think I got 4 or 5 knives out of those to a handle before I was ready for the next one, but they're $3. So it's not that bad.
Yeah. Well, and with reservation, 36 grit belts for me on ceramic are mostly reserved for certain types of stock removal, like desert ironwood and ringigi. Man, I've tried using a 50 grit belt on them even, and it
Mm-hmm.
it gums them up so quickly that I get it down to like five, like accounting for the fact that I know there's going to be some deeper scratches, about 5%. Um, I'll get 36 down to about 5% of what my final dimensions are, and then I'll
Right.
usually go to like a 50 or an 80, 120 or whatever. But I'm a little bit more careful about certain things with those oily, very hard woods,
Yeah.
because I've had to hand sand because I was like, well, if I don't remove this individual scratch that seems to be a little bit deeper than every other one by hand, then I'm going to screw the geometry up, right?
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do with it. And that's where I've actually started relying a little bit more on files.
Hmm.
A lot of people are like, well, I'm going to do everything on the machine, and then I'm just going to go right to hand sanding and do a bunch of repetitive actions with that. And I'm like, nah, dude, there's some areas where like I will not be able to rely on just hand sanding for 5, 6, 7 hours. I'm going to use a file next, and then I'll be able to remove targeted material, and then I'll go to hand sanding. If
Yep.
I'm really concerned that I did something that I need, like, if when I'm going to files now, or I'm doing a bunch of hand sanding, it's because I screwed up in my order of operation or something, and that's
Yep.
that's like the oopsie. And then I'm like, okay, well, this is where you pay, Aaron. This just reminds you that you don't have it all figured out, or you forgot a step.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like a self-solving problem. And then I remember it next time. I'm like, no, dude, I'm not gonna like. Remember order of operation, remember belt finishes, and try to get the machine to do what you want it to.
Yep. Don't rely on yourself fixing it on the next step if you can do it easier on this step.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, dude. There's a lot to knives, and I feel even at the amount of time that I've been in it, that I'm still scratching the surface on the complexities of it and the nuances of it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's you start feeling good about yourself until you see, one of Steve Johnson's knives laying on a table, or you see a photo of one of Matt Martin's knives, or whatever, any of that, and you're like, okay, I am not the hot stuff that I thought I was 5 seconds ago. There's a lot to learn, and you know, there's something to the old the adage, you should never stop learning. Yeah, you hear that about everything. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, obviously you never stop learning. Whatever you're doing, you never stop learning. But it's really, really true. You have to internalize that sentiment. And it has to mean more to you than just something that people say. If you are not improving, you're not troubleshooting, you're not looking for ways to make your method better or steal methods from somebody else, then what's the point?
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think that we live in a culture where we must embrace industrial espionage, um,
Mhm.
because that is one of the ways that you can beat the learning curve. Like I don't know about anybody else, but uh, spending 30 years to perfect a craft or whatever, to me just seems like not where I want to be. And it's not that I expect instant gratification by any means. I'm willing to put in the work, but there's
Mhm.
more of a portion that's spent in R&D now, that is I'm looking very intentionally at a micro system inside of knives or whatever to help me get from one point to another,
Mhm.
and that's where I think looking at ways that other people do it really great and asking them helps lower that learning curve. It used to be where they'd say, go to a knife maker's shop and learn from, like, do some classes or whatever, because it'll shave 5 years off your
Mhm.
learning curve, and that is true.
Yeah,
That is
absolutely.
true. There's other ways to hack around it now where you don't have to do classes as much, but um, even still, when you get your like, how close are you getting your new shop built out?
I am gonna be, if everything goes according to plan. I'm gonna be moving into, because it's a house and a shop. It's a whole thing. I'm gonna be moving in the week after Blade Show West, and setting up a shop is the first order of business, because I can't have no workshop for an extended period of time. So hopefully end of October I'll be up and running and rocking and rolling full speed.
Yeah, that's good. I actually was up close to your neck of the wood. I was up in Wichita picking up an
Oh
anvil.
wow, huh.
Yeah, but
We
it's
went all
still,
the way out there for that.
yeah, it was well, it was still four, almost 4.5 hours from where you're at. So um Kansas City's a little bit further away than I wanted to drive. I would have hit you up, but then I was like, of course he's gonna, like, say, let's go ahead and meet up, and then I'd be out another 8 hours of drive time.
Yeah, that would have been a big ask. I get that, and there's a lot of Kansas between here and there.
Oh yeah. I went up, I found this hay button. It was like 100, they said it was 150 pounder, but it's 140, 148, something like that. 148, 149. So very close.
Yeah.
But it looked in really great condition. It's exactly what I need to be able to start, putzing around with forging again to get into the journeyman smith with the ABS, which,
Yeah.
I'll have to wait on another 2 and 3/4 years, unless I
Right.
do the intro to bladesmithing course. But I we looked at it, and one of the things that was good about it was that it was sitting in a shop for quite a
Mhm.
while, and they were a fabrication shop, and they made this custom welded stand. And I was like, dude, just the stand alone is probably about a $450 stand. I mean, it was real nice, custom to that anvil, right?
Right.
And so we made the drive, but from where we're at, it's with stops, it was a 6 hour one way. So we went up and did a snatch and grab, and then drove back, and so we were on the road for like 12 hours, and that's a
Mhm.
lot to take the wife and little kiddo. Like Evelyn did not understand how boring certain parts of Oklahoma and Kansas can be.
Yep. Yeah,
She
it's
was
not
just,
unlike the drive from here out to Denver. It's a quick drive, but man, you got to have something to do or like a good road trip partner or something because it's there's nothing.
yeah. What's funny is, like my entire family, I'm sure that they would say like I'm the heckler. Um, but like Evelyn started heckling me. She's like, why? She started getting bored and she's like, why do you even need this anvil anyhow? Like, you just had to have it, didn't you? And I was like, dude, you're just an observer in this. You need to be quiet.
You're like 5 years old. You just sit there and do your thing.
Yeah, eight, but who's counting?
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, no, she was like definitely not happy about driving. But my wife and I
Sure.
love road trips as long as we can make it work and there's not just like a deep necessity to be, from place to place too quickly. I would have stayed the night if it wasn't for the fact that we didn't bring all the stuff for the kiddo to have.
I'm anxious to see how that works out for you, especially coming with from such a strong stock removal background. Like as you dive into forging, whether it's you're just making billets for yourself or whether you're forging out, knives and really dumping yourself into that school of craftsmanship. I'm really interested to see how that plays out with your skill set, what things are easier, what things are more challenging.
Yeah. Well, something to understand about my background in knives is, obviously I always knew that stock removal was every road leads to stock removal, right? Um, but what I started forging blades pretty early on, and doing forge work, but then
Mhm.
I got a frozen shoulder. Like it kind of been like bugging me for several years before I started
Right.
making knives. But then it got too much when I started to do forging and everything and blacksmithing, and I was like, I'm just going to hang that portion of what I was focusing on up.
Yeah.
But in the ABS focus, obviously they have to be forged knives. But what I'm most interested in, like with the JS, everybody that I've talked to so far indicate that there's a large portion of the JS that is bench time. So
Mhm.
yes, you have your forged knife that you do, but a larger portion of the time to get the fit and finish and everything like that it needs to be, and all the aesthetic components checked off is
Mhm.
bench time, right? Which I'm already used to.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, where I'm really interested in the ABS and kind of where that journey takes me is in understanding some of the caveats of forging. I want to do some integral bolster knives and things like that.
Yeah.
And I also am like very interested in this humongous quagmire or enigma, whichever way you look at it, of mosaic Damascus.
Yeah.
Because what I've learned so far is that the time and energy that it takes to do mosaic Damascus, you should be honored to have somebody who makes it where you can buy it.
Right.
Because
Oh,
just
absolutely.
any of the like the Bill Poors or the Burks or anyone like that, Nichols, whatever Damascus flavor it is, just Damascus, not even considering the mosaics. If they're selling it to you, they're crazy because the amount of
Yeah.
time in it, I don't know that there really is a profit margin to be had over those Damascus prices.
Now they're doing it because they can, not because it's the lucrative move.
Yeah. Well, and for me, like the journey to master smith is mostly a focus on learning some of the intricacies of it and learning mosaic Damascus and everything, in
Yeah.
order to be able to have command over that kind of material choice for things that I'm going to do in the future with, like, I'm not going to say art knife. I mean, I guess I can. Like, my focus isn't just like sticking art knives or anything like that, but there are things that I want to do, like series of knives and whatnot, that I need to get to a place where I can conceptualize things and know how to apply it, and I can make my own mosaic Damascus and other things,
Yeah.
and be able
Yeah.
to combine that in a way that I just couldn't. I can't hire in for that. There's no way that I can outsource that.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, so like a part, most of the journey is so that way I can have a deeper artistic expression, and make what I want to make. And I need to be able to learn how to do that. Maybe I could have just taken a, Mosaic Damascus course, but this is also an accolade or a validation that I can have, that I can also work inside of the Smith medium, and achieve that too. Much like the guild is for general purposes, I think this is more of like a niche to forging, and I kind of want to do it.
Yeah, I've never known you to take any half measures with anything, so I'm not surprised that's the route that you're going.
Well, I mean, I just have to make my life difficult.
Yeah, no, you are the I think Sisyphus, and I picture you in my circle of friends. That's you, buddy.
Well, I'm sure winding down the show and everything like that, you have a lot of sleep that you probably will never catch up on. But I'm interested to know, like, what is in, like, other than the shop and doing shows and things like that, like what's kind of like the next thing that you want to do? Since we've talked, it's been, since the beginning of this year and everything. Like, what's next for you?
I'm just excited that I have hit that sweet spot with my production methods, I think, or I'm getting really close to it. Um, every run of knives that I do as a batch gets cleaner. Um, I'm excited to do more of that. It's been over a year since the last time I sent knives to a dealer in any quantity. And I want to get into a regular, like, and Jake and I talked about this every month or every other month, sending a batch out to a dealer instead of waiting 18 months and then sending him 85 knives. I want to send him 20 pieces in January, 20 pieces in February, 20 pieces in March, and get that kind of coinciding with my custom work so that I can kind of build those two separate tiers. If you want a crow, you can get a base model crow from DLT for, what, at 350. If you want a crow built your way, I can do that for you, and we'll spec it out exactly how you want. And then it's almost like, I wouldn't call it this. I don't want that much of a separation, but then it's almost like a Night Watch knife versus an Alex Harrison custom. You know what I mean? So as I kind of explore that and build those two things out, those two different like tiers, um, I'm interested to see what the nuances of making that work are going to be like. And I think having the new shop set up the way I am envisioning it is going to go a long way towards making that a reality. I'm really excited about it. I go to sleep thinking about it. I wake up thinking about it. I'm impatient. I'm ready to get in there and get started.
Yeah. Well, I mean, knives are kind of like, uh, they reinvigorate the like the imagination that you have when you're a kid.
Yep.
I feel that way all the time. Like, my wife is like always telling me, talk about knives all the time. It's like,
Yeah.
so one thing or another, and the podcast just kind of expands on that, because I'm not only talking about my own knives with my business,
Yep.
or glorified hobby, but I'm talking about everybody else's knives too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And well, I think I have a a business entity that is Levere and Son Knife Co. Right,
Yeah.
but I've always made Aaron Levere knives.
Yeah.
And one thing that I don't think that I've ever done particularly well is, or maybe it was never my intention necessarily, but it's to have um, knives that are popularized by my brand, not me
Right.
personally, but by, because you talk about the difference between Night Watch versus Alex Harrison, right?
Right.
And I don't know that, like, I'm on the opposite side of it. Like, I every knife is an Aaron Levere knife, and Levere and Son Knife Co. is like the story about how I got into knives, and
Yeah.
my stepson and everything. But I also don't think that any one model of my knives or whatever, has been so popular that I've been like, okay, well, I can make 50 of those and send them off to somebody, and they're all going to sell. And so
Yeah.
maybe that's a little bit different. You are definitely the type of maker that spends a lot of time in this design process and ideating on things, right? and
Oh yeah.
figuring out what that aesthetic is. And that was kind of like the lead into kind of like the last component of this is to talk about design, because you're a prolific designer, in my eyes. Like you're always thinking about different things that you can hack, different things that you can steal from me and make better.
Thanks.
Well, I mean, how often do we have conversations like, "Oh man, I'm gonna steal that," and I'm like, "Dude, go for it!" Like, I want to see what Alex does with this concept, because I know that whatever it is that you're gonna do is not gonna be anything close to like what I do. It's gonna be your spin on it. It's gonna take a design element that you like, a constraint that you put on your designs that's an element of something you see somewhere else. And it's cool for me to like be able to think about stuff that I make and give you an idea for something that you can do that you're taking in a completely different direction. Like I don't like people just biting off of me. But I love the process where we work off of each other and inspire each other to do something different and our own things. And that's something that I've always really appreciated about your design style and what you come up with. Anytime I've seen sketches, I'm like, man, you got it.
And I don't. It's hard to quantify how that happens. I mean, like when you made that beautiful, beautiful Zulu trapper with the jig bone, the fixed blade Zulu. That thing lived rent free in my head, and I was like, I need to make one of those. I'm not kidding when I told you I pulled that photo up on my phone, laid it next to my sketchbook, and drew it. And when I was done with it and happy with it, the knife on that sketch was so unrecognizably not anything approaching a Zulu fixed blade. No one ever would have known that that's what I was angling at. But I drew it, and I got 95% of the way there. And then I started moving lines around and changing. Like, oh, I would have had this. So, this is kind of my design cue. I do this a lot. Maybe I should change this. And by the time I was done, it was something completely different. I made one of them. I gave it to Tara at DLT. We reached an arrangement for something else, but I still have the pattern. I'll make another one eventually, but at this point, it's hard for me not to do something with my design cues. And a big part of it is less about, purely from a designing angle and more like I know how my tools behave and I know what I can and can't accomplish. I've kind of changed the ways that I do sharpening choil lately because I've got access to a quarter-inch wheel now. Um, and it still depends on the knife, but you can't design a knife and then build it if your methods, your tools don't have a way to make that physically happen. And it's the age old, the tension between engineers and machinists. They run into that problem a lot in every aspect, industry across the world. Um, so that's one of the first things that I dig into is what can I accomplish? That the two finger choil that I put on a lot of handles. I know that I either need to be able to get a 2-inch belt in there, or I'm going to have to cut a belt in half to to profile the inside of that handle. Um, Stuff like that. I know that if I'm using a 1/8 inch stock and I'm using a 6-inch grinding wheel, I'm only going to be able to make that bevel so high, so it can't be a really tall knife. Um, there are limitations that I have to keep in mind and design my way around. And then inside that context, there are certain cues that I just like. Most of the knives I design have a drop point. Most of the knives that I design are small because I am short and I have small hands and I like small knives. Um, if I design something with a guard, I design it around the idea that the guard is going to be quarter-inch stock because that's the brass that I buy. It's stuff like that. I make sure that the pattern fits into inch and a half wide bar stock because that's what I buy. Um, so you have to approach it practically as well as aesthetically and think about what am I capable of? What are the limitations of my material? What are the limitations of my tools? What are the limitations of my skills? I can draw a kick-ass dagger. I don't know how to grind a dagger. I'm not very good at daggers. So I'm careful about that kind of thing because I know I have to take my skill set into account. And the rest is just incidental. I mean, I'll pick up a sketch and look at it down the spine like it's an actual knife, and I'm looking at it 2D because I want to make sure there's not a dip somewhere. Um, if it takes me less than an hour to sketch a knife from start to finish, it's not gonna be good. It takes me a long time, and I usually have to come back the next day and look at it and find something that I couldn't see before because I've been staring at it for too long. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and that's something that I really admire about Grace Horn.
Yeah.
Is like the sketchbooks that she does is like hark like it's a herald to an earlier time where she she also was impressed by the early Sheffield cutlers and whatnot doing sketches and things. And the way that she plans out everything and writes a storybook for each one of the things that she makes to me is it's part of the creative process for her. And I'm going to tell you, like, if I spend an hour and a half drawing something, it's going to be horrible because I suck at drawing. um I,
Sure.
I've never really been able to get past the um the design phase. Like like what you see that I create is me
Mm,
saying, okay, well, I have limitations in my mind, right? Like or
mhm.
constraints about how I want to do things. And I like sketching it would be one thing, but I really just have to go and make that thing and then screw
Yeah.
up a bunch of stuff and I make it through osmosis. And
Yeah.
I wish honestly, dude, that I had the talent to sketch things out and to be able to evaluate things before I actually have to grind them and spend all that time. Because for me, there's a portion that I just don't want to make like design new stuff because grinding stuff out and doing all that takes a lot of time. And it's
Mm,
also more costly than paper. Um, but it's a limitation that I have where I'm not good at drafting. I'm not good at like even like dude, I have so many like like of those French curves and different things like that sitting around,
yeah.
and I get started on this kind of like idea or whatever, and then I just screw everything up. It's just a line's not right or whatever, and so maybe it's just like I can't get it out of my own head about it. But it'd be interesting if you ever decided to do like a class or whatever on knife design
Mhm.
to proliferate that, because I think about from your earlier knives to where you're at now, I see themes, right? And I was
Right.
talking with Brian from Keennison Knives about that. He was in industrial design, and
Mhm.
then wanted to get into making knives because of the cost of having knives that he wanted to.
Yeah.
And then that kind of snowballs into being like having a full-time knife business and having a partner and them doing all this stuff together. But there's elements to his design aesthetic that crop up even though he's doing something completely different design wise on certain things. You can
Yeah.
always see what he's doing and the artifacts of his creativity throughout
Mm.
that. And I see that same consistency of of your creative spirit in everything that you do. It's fascinated me to think about like design and knife design and everything, but also with the admiration because I don't feel I intrinsically possess those skills.
It's just fine tuning, man, and it's learning the things that you like. I mean, you hear BB King play one note, and you know who exactly who it is. You look at a Bark River design, and every like the belly on every drop point that they do, not the top, but the belly. Mike draws them all the same way. You know a Mike Stewart blade profile when you see it. Same with Bob's knives or with like Skelton. Skelton doesn't put a maker's mark on his knives because he doesn't have to. You look at one of his and you immediately know who made that thing. That's really cool. Um, and it's just, I think, I don't know that there's a way to do that other than honestly. And I think you're informed by the things that you like, the things that you collect, and the knives that live like rent free in your head. You know, we've all got patterns that are out there that like just we they blew us away from minute one and they're just there now. And I think that the more exposure you have to other stuff and the more time you spend messing with different designs, the more you develop that sense of, oh, you know, this is the truest picture of Alex's design cues. This is how Aaron makes a knife. It's just continuing to develop that. And I would tell you, keep teaching yourself how to draw, man, because I have no talent as a visual artist. I can draw nothing. I can paint nothing. It's only sketching knives, and I'm only good at that because I know how to make them. I know what the lines are supposed to look like. And I get frustrated too. I can see it in my head. I can't get it on the paper. That is absolutely a thing. But the fact that you know how they're constructed and know what they're supposed to look like goes a long way towards being able to put them on paper.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Well, like talking about that Zulu spear,
Mhm.
I um that thing kind of fought me in the sense that what there's a subset of like slip joint makers especially that go for like the historical representation of knives like
Yeah.
design provenance as it were. So
Hmm.
if you have a Tony Bowes style Zulu spear in a slip joint or a fixed blade, then
Hmm.
it makes the most sense that from a design perspective and execution perspective, you make it like Tony did.
Yeah.
And there are people that get away from that, but I tried to constrain myself to make a knife that was like Tony did. You know, the draw swedge was in the right spot, the handle material looked the right way, and so on and
Hmm.
so forth. And the the reality is what I realized afterwards is that I can't remove myself from the knives that I'm making because
Hmm.
I saw that in some ways I got it photographed, it looked good and everything like that, sure, right? But I saw
Yeah.
it as a failure in my constraints because it didn't look like one that Tony makes, right?
Okay. Sure.
And so my ability to execute to a historic like a provenance or design perspective, I
Hmm.
don't really know if I'm capable of that. And you know, it's a good thing in a lot of ways because I just make what I make, right?
Right.
And everything. But it was also a learning experience for me in saying that um, maybe my focus shouldn't be in reproducing other like historical or like design provenance type of work, but then really focusing on like these aesthetic choices that I make and what really drives that. And that's kind of like the introspection is don't focus so much um, on other people's lanes, focus more on your own and what you're really good at. And you know, it's I wouldn't say like it didn't keep me up at night or anything, but the fact that you look at it as a means of inspiration for your own design and whatnot is interesting to me because I wouldn't have, based on my experience with that knife, I wouldn't have thought that anybody cared about it but me.
Well, and it's because of a difference in philosophy there. I mean, and I don't mean this to sound callous. It's not that I know that's Tony Bow's pattern. I don't care about the fine points of how he did it. I like the lines on it, and I like what it evokes, how it moves. That's what I am shooting for. The same with Bob's knives. You've seen a million drop point hunters, right? Uh, I've seen one of Bob's. I've seen one of Matt's, which he's gonna hate me for saying this, but I think Matt makes a better levelless drop point hunter than Bob ever did. Um, and all these other makers that have done them. I am not making anyone's Bob Loveless drop point hunter. I'm not making Bob Loveless's drop point hunter. I'm making Alex's drop point hunter. It's a marriage of all those different design cues that have come from these different guys, and I want it to fit my hand the way I shape it. I want it to have my curves that I put on a blade. I want it to have my grinds, right? Um, so I'm borrowing the shape. I'm borrowing the essence of that knife, but I'm not trying to make a one for one copy of the exact thing that Bob did. I'm not trying to be true to that. I'm trying to make Alex's drop point hunter.
Yeah, and I think um, as I think about that, and as I've pondered over the years, knives and what we do with our life energy um, is evocative. right? You look at something that we do, and there's
Yep.
something that it evokes. Sometimes if you're making like a shank or a knife shaped object, it's like, well, I mean, yes, somebody has a journey that they're just starting. Others, you're picking up, cues of design or whatever. I don't know that in some ways I've been intentional in the build, and things that in my mind's eye look right, but there's not been like a deep seated, this is what I'm going for in a granular way. And I've thought a lot more
Right.
about that. Like, I mean, what if I do tie a hand behind my back and say that I need to do something a very specific way? Like, can I accomplish that? Can I bubble up creativity and evoke an emotion or a reaction to something, um, because I've focused on this one thing? I'm
Right.
um, if anybody's listening, I've been kind of intentional in doing that with the podcast. Like, what I'm trying to do a very specific type of thing with the podcast, and I didn't know about what I was doing when I first started. I thought podcasts cool, knife makers cool. I'm already doing all this stuff and talking to people, and I like these conversations. But as things have grown, I get a little bit more specific about, well, I understand why I started doing it, but what's going to keep me doing it, right? And
Right.
that's kind of the same journey that I'm taking through knives, is like, what is going to keep me interested in it? And I'm sussing out those things for myself, and I want people to like look at my work, and for it to, just have something that ticks boxes, and maybe they don't even know what those things are, but they're just like, man, that hits. It's the same way,
Right.
like you're talking about BB King. Like, the reason why his playing and everything is so what it is because it is evocative. Like, you're
Mhm.
like, man, I don't know what this thing is, like this chord structure or the way he makes a Lucille Sig or whatever, but it's like that
Mhm.
is just him, and you can't get it any other way, and it makes you like
Yep.
fist pump and cry at the same time. And those, I think, are things that I think about, like, what if you can get so specific with your craft that when people look at it, they're just like, man, this
Yeah.
is this is where it's at. You've done everything that I think you can do in this medium.
You're right. And I think the what's so cool about artists like that, whether you're talking about BB King or whether you're talking about Jim Skelton, is how true they are to their own stuff, their own sound, their own design cues, and it's not like you and I have this like squirrel syndrome. We're like, oh, I want to make a really good leveless pattern. I also want to like dive into some Randall knives and build some really cool Randalls, and I want to be the go-to for super tiny EDCs. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with broadening your skill set. You should do those things, but that should be in an effort to zero in what's the truest version of your thing. I mean, Chick-fil-A makes one thing, and people line up around the block for it every day because they're good at it, and that is what they do. It's it is not shortchanging yourself to dig into your niche once you find it. The trick is just finding it.
Yeah, and that's I think, I my advice to like new makers and whatnot like a while ago, was to say, man, like, find that thing sooner than later, because you spend all this time like
Mm.
squirreling it, as it were, and you can very easily lose yourself in what everybody else is doing and what the industry is demanding and everything like that. And if you're treating it as a business, then do what consumers want. If you're doing it as a personal mode of expression, you can't do that by doing what everybody else wants. There's and you
Right.
have to, as a maker, decide on what that path looks like for you, and then to be able to like kind of fill in, like, it's not dot to dot necessarily. You're building the dots to make the whatever it is at the end that you're trying to convey. And the earlier that you can kind of figure out what your general direction is, the more you can kind of build out that vision map, as it were, on how to take the next logical step to get to where you want to be. Um, So, I mean, if that's a
Yeah.
production knife maker and having a big company and stuff like that, man, there are definitely some steps that you have to take in order to be able to do that and to sacrifice some of um, the absolute creative mechanisms that you have for it. Because it's there's not always business like production business in creating every little idea that you thought was interesting. You got to go with what works, and then maybe have some artistic expression on the side. Some people might argue that they do production and are completely artistic, but I think that if it's a business, then you really kind of are constraining yourself a little bit that way. But I don't know, man. It's a lot to think about all the time. Every single episode I do, every waking hour, every dream that I have about knives, I wonder, and I'm constantly thinking about it. And I think that's probably the reason why I've stuck with knives as long as I have, is because it's a constant journey and thought. And I like the fact that we all share that in one way or another. Like, I like the people that think deeply about this stuff.
I agree. I think it speaks to a I mean, present company excluded because you and I are not this, but I think it speaks to a certain creative, at least if not, general maturity. Asking yourself maybe not why you're doing what you're doing, but what you're really doing, what you're trying to accomplish. Um, I make knife, comma one. That's not a good enough reason to get up and do it every day because none of this stuff is easy. You know what I mean? But if you dig in and get a little introspective about it and try to figure out what you're really trying to accomplish, what you do and what you don't want to do, and why, what it means to you, why you're doing it, ultimately, I think it makes you a better craftsman, at least to yourself.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I've um, a lot of like my life views are based on childhood traumas and stuff. And like my dad's midlife crisis was pretty interesting to me. And I was always like, oh
Yeah.
man, like whenever I get to my midlife crisis or whatever, I wonder how I'll handle it. And I realize like I'm actually like midlife, like I'm like, I know that they say 40 years is midlife, but most people, like, the average lifespan's not 80 years. It's like I'm going through my midlife crisis of sorts, right? And I think that the
Right, right.
midlife evaluation for me, it's not a crisis because I'm actually owning it, is really, it is, what am I doing? Like, I'm at a point where it's like I
Mhm.
have like one life to live. I get I get a few opportunities to screw up from here on out and still be able to kind of like readjust. What is it that I want the next, 15, 20, 30 years to look like for me, and what kind of freedom do I want to have? And I evaluate that in my personal life. I evaluate in my relationships with other people, and I evaluate that in what I'm doing inside of this craft that I've chosen. And a few years ago, it was like, dude, I don't. If I can't sell knives at shows and do this and that, I don't know if I should even continue knives. It's just an expensive hobby. And then I had to say, meh, maybe it is an
Yeah,
expensive hobby, but if it is just an expensive hobby, what's next, right? Am I okay embracing that? What am I going to do? And so, I think that there's a lot of people that I talk with. I mean, you and I, we talk a lot about that stuff. Matt and I talk a lot about that stuff. I think that we all collectively have these conversations
mhm,
about what is it as we age and as we mature in all these different ways in life. What purpose are we applying, and what energy are we putting forth towards it? And it just so happens that knives is very philosophical, so I take things that I learn in knives and I apply them to real life. Because this is like,
yeah, wherever
yeah,
you can.
and I mean, also there's things that I do in knives where I think like, like maybe next time I'll argue this way with my wife and see how that goes.
Yeah, it doesn't work though, does it?
Nope, not at all. It is a zero sum game.
Outstanding.
Yeah. All right, bud. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show and everything. I appreciate you spending your time with me, especially considering it's precious. And you got a lot of other things on your plate. But I am really interested to see all these pictures and everything like that once you get your shop built out. And we do need to make a date where we can go and hang out and build stuff and play around with things, see what the diminishing return is on taper tangs, and do some like scientific studies on things. Maybe we can publish a paper like Laren does.
Yeah, I agree. I think, well, first of all, I appreciate the callback. I had a blast coming back. I had a blast last time.
Absolutely.
And I think there's some fun to be had there. I mean, if you and I are going to get together and make some dust in a workshop, then we got to have some stupid ulterior motive, something that only we care about. And I think that pretty much hits the nail on the head. So, give me a month or two, and we'll get something set up. I'll have you out here, and I've got, I'll have the space to host you, which will be cool, and we'll have a good time.
Yeah. We'll do a steel jam session.
Yes, we will.
All right, buddy. Well, you have a good night. And again, it's been a pleasure, man.
Absolutely. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.